get a lot of attention when General Motors shows it to us tonight. Today, the company announced that it's making a substantial investment.
You've been lied to about GM trucks, and the truth? It's worse than you think. Engines failing without warning, lawsuits piling up, viral videos exposing what GM refused to admit. This wasn't just a defect, it was a cover-up, and every mile you drive could be the one that leaves you stranded. Why didn't GM recall the trucks when they knew the truth? Why did executives put Wall Street above safety? And what does this mean for every GM owner right now? Because by the end of this video, you'll realize it's not just about trucks, it's about whether you can ever trust GM again. The shocking truth behind GM's pickups. This wasn't just a manufacturing flaw, it was a betrayal of consumer trust. General Motors, a name synonymous with reliability and American craftsmanship, has now found itself at the center of a scandal that shook the automotive world. At the heart of the controversy lies the L87 6.2 LV8 engine, found in some of GM's most popular pickups and SUVs. For years, GM marketed these vehicles as the epitome of strength, performance, and durability. But beneath the polished chrome and sleek commercials, the truth was far more troubling. The engine, marketed as the powerhouse behind the Silverado and Sierra, had a fatal flaw. Owners reported catastrophic failures, engine seizures, broken parts, and gaping holes, leaving them stranded without warning. GM stayed silent, hoping to avoid a costly recall as the problem escalated unnoticed. Only when lawsuits began to pile up and viral videos of failed engines spread across social media did GM start to feel the pressure. The recall came too late for many. 2,800 drivers were left to deal with the fallout. In the face of growing public outrage, GM was forced to admit the problem. But by then, trust had already begun to erode. The company's initial response wasn't swift. It was defensive. The damage was done, and it wasn't just a bad engine. It was a calculated corporate gamble. GM chose to protect its bottom line at the expense of its loyal customers. The engine that shouldn't exist. Imagine buying a truck and being told it's ticking like a time bomb, with no warning signs. That's exactly what happened to thousands of GM truck owners who found themselves victims of the L87 6.2 LV8 engine's catastrophic flaws. The issue lay deep within the engine's design, defective rod bearings and misaligned crankshafts that led to metal-on-metal friction, causing early wear and eventual failure. These were not small errors. They were fundamental problems in the engineering that should have been caught long before the trucks hit the market. For many owners, the engine failed suddenly, with no warning, no lights, noise, or performance drop. Mechanics found engines ruined by clogged oil passages and worn-out parts. GM ignored the issue until lawsuits, media attention, and viral videos forced them to reluctantly acknowledge the problem they had tried to hide. But GM didn't take immediate action. Instead, they continued to push out trucks with the same faulty engine, knowing full well the damage that was being done. This wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a systemic failure, a result of GM prioritizing cost-cutting measures over the quality and safety that its customers had come to expect. What GM did next wasn't a solution, it was a way to offload blame and cost onto the customer, further deepening the rift between the company and its once loyal buyers. If you're finding this information eye-opening, hit the like button to support the channel. Drop a comment below with your thoughts or experiences. Let's get this conversation going. Your input matters and helps more people see the truth. The oil fix that fueled the problem. GM's fix wasn't a repair. It was a hidden liability waiting to explode. Faced with a mounting crisis and growing consumer backlash, General Motors didn't redesign the L87 engine. They didn't implement any comprehensive changes to the flawed engine. Instead, they chose a far cheaper and more short-sighted solution: a change in oil. GM instructed owners to switch from the factory-installed 0W20 oil to a thicker 0W40, claiming this would prevent further catastrophic failures by reducing engine heat buildup. The thicker oil GM recommended seemed reasonable, but it didn't fix the root issue. Instead, it masked symptoms while reducing fuel efficiency, costing owners more at the pump. Trucks saw significant drops in miles per gallon, and over time, these extra fuel costs added up to thousands of dollars. But the real issue wasn't just the fuel economy. Several lawsuits later claimed that GM's oil weight fix wasn't meant to be a permanent solution at all. Critics argued that it was a short-term patch designed to extend the life of the engine just long enough to get past the warranty period, after which GM wouldn't be liable for the inevitable failures. This fix was not about helping customers. It was about protecting GM from future lawsuits. The true problem, the defective rod bearings and misaligned crankshafts, was never addressed. GM had simply chosen to delay the inevitable and let the customers bear the consequences. The silence that strands thousands. Imagine your truck breaks down on a remote road with no warning, no help, just silence from GM. This was the reality for countless GM pickup owners who found themselves stranded in dangerous situations with no way to get immediate assistance. The failure of the Light E7 engine often happened without any warning signs, leaving drivers with no time to react. And when these owners reached out to GM, they were met with silence, or worse, blame. Chris, who had just bought his dream GMC AT4X, faced engine failure with fewer than 4,200 miles. No warning lights, just an engine failure on the highway. GM delayed warranty repairs, leaving him stranded and missing work. Thousands of GM owners reported similar failures, feeling abandoned and vulnerable. In the face of growing complaints, GM continued to ignore the issue. The company failed to provide adequate support for customers whose vehicles had failed within the warranty period, and for many, the breakdowns happened just outside of it. This failure to act was more than just bad customer service. It was a systematic disregard for consumer safety. GM's failure to take action in a timely manner revealed that their priority was not the people who trusted their vehicles, but the image they projected to the public and their bottom line. When GM finally responded, it was too little, too late. Their words, offering minimal solutions and shifting the blame, were just a cover-up for a much larger problem. The great GM cover-up. Behind the scenes, GM was more concerned with Wall Street than with the people they were letting down. As the news of the engine failures continued to spread, General Motors faced mounting pressure from consumers, the media, and legal entities. But instead of taking immediate action to address the problem, GM's top executives chose to remain silent. The company's leadership, most notably CEO Mary Barra, made a conscious decision to delay public acknowledgement of the issue and focus on shielding their financial interests. GM's priority was not the safety of its customers, but maintaining investor confidence, which was tied to their stock performance and Wall Street's perception of the company. Internally, GM was well aware of the widespread engine failures. Engineers had already raised concerns about the L87 6.2 LV8 engine's design, including the defective rod bearings and misaligned crankshafts. But instead of addressing these concerns through a recall or redesign, the company chose to bury the issue. The leadership's strategy was clear: avoid a full-blown recall at all costs, as it would likely send their stock into freefall. As lawsuits and negative press mounted, GM's legal and PR teams scrambled to find ways to downplay the situation. The company issued vague statements, assuring customers that they were working on a solution, but the truth was that they were simply buying time. GM's decision wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated strategy to avoid accountability. They hoped that by keeping quiet, they could weather the storm without making a costly admission of guilt. The cost of trust, consumer backlash. When trust breaks, it's not just an engine that fails, it's an entire brand that collapses. The public's faith in General Motors, once a pillar of American industry, began to crumble as the engine failures continued to plague truck owners. What started as an isolated issue soon became a full-scale crisis. Customers who had once swore by GM's dependability were left with broken trucks, delayed repairs, and, worst of all, no answers. GM's silence in the face of mounting failures only deepened the sense of betrayal among its loyal customer base. For many of GM's truck owners, the L87 engine's catastrophic failure wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a personal violation. These trucks were often more than just vehicles. They were investments, sometimes the lifeblood of small businesses and families. When the trucks failed without warning, the financial and emotional toll was significant. GM's failure to act swiftly alienated their most devoted customers, who began to question the very foundation of the company. GM's brand, which had long been associated with toughness and reliability, suddenly seemed hollow. The backlash was fierce, as truck owners took to social media, car forums, and even protest rallies to demand accountability. This wasn't just about engines breaking, it was about GM breaking the one thing that mattered: trust. Once lost, trust is nearly impossible to regain, and GM found itself on the receiving end of a consumer revolt that would haunt the company for years to come. The competitors smell blood. While GM tried to cover up the truth, Ford and Toyota had no intention of letting it slide. In the midst of GM's crisis, its competitors saw an opportunity. Ford, Toyota, and Ram, all stalwarts in the truck market, began to target GM's weaknesses with precision. Ford, which had long held a strong position in the truck market, launched an aggressive ad campaign promoting the durability and reliability of its F-Series trucks. The tagline, "Built for the long haul." No excuses resonated with customers who were losing faith in GM's ability to deliver on those promises. Similarly, Toyota took aim at GM's reputation with the Tundra, marketing its redesigned V6 turbo engine as engineered without compromise, a not-so-subtle jab at GM's faulty V8. Ram, never one to shy away from competition, leveraged its strong powertrain warranties and superior customer service, in contrast to GM's inability to address the engine failures. These competitors didn't just promote their own trucks, they subtly highlighted GM's failures, nudging consumers toward their own offerings. What was once an industry battle for market share quickly became a fight for consumer loyalty. Many GM customers, burned by engine failures and frustrated by GM's lack of action, began to look elsewhere. Ford and Toyota saw this as an opportunity to poach GM's loyalists, offering not only better reliability, but also the promise of a stronger commitment to customer satisfaction. GM wasn't just losing trucks, they were losing their place as America's top automaker. Wall Street walks away. When investors start jumping ship, you know something's seriously wrong. The crisis surrounding GM's L87 V8 engine had severe financial consequences for the company. Wall Street, once confident in GM's ability to deliver strong profits, began to lose faith in the automaker. GM's stock price, which had been steadily climbing in recent years, dropped precipitously as news of the engine failures spread. Analysts downgraded the company's stock, citing the mounting legal liabilities and the loss of consumer trust. GM's executives, already under fire for their handling of the crisis, now faced growing scrutiny from investors who were concerned about the long-term viability of the company. In a desperate attempt to stem the tide, GM announced that it would pause its planned $4 billion stock buyback program, a move that further alarmed investors. Buybacks are typically seen as a sign of financial health, but in GM's case, the pause was a clear indication that the company was trying to conserve capital in the face of pending lawsuits and regulatory scrutiny. This move, along with the ongoing legal battles, only fueled Wall Street's growing pessimism. The company's stock took a hit, dropping more than 8% in a single week, and analysts began to question whether GM's leadership had to recover from the crisis. The worst part? It wasn't just the trucks that were breaking down, it was GM's entire financial structure. Investors once loyal to the automaker now viewed GM as a risky proposition, and the company's credibility was left in tatters. The lawsuit storm. GM thought they could dodge accountability, but the courts had a different idea. As the severity of the engine failures became more apparent, the lawsuits against General Motors began to mount. Initially, GM had hoped the issue would fade away, but it quickly became clear that they could not escape the consequences of their actions. Drivers who had trusted the company with their hard-earned money were now left with vehicles that were effectively ticking time bombs. These customers were no longer just disappointed, they were angry, and they were seeking justice. Class action lawsuits flooded the courts, with customers demanding compensation for vehicle damage and financial losses. It wasn't just about faulty trucks, it was about broken trust. The lawsuits accused GM of knowingly selling defective vehicles, hiding risks, and prioritizing profits over customer safety. GM's legal strategy aimed to delay the cases, offering some settlements, but not enough to satisfy all. The legal pressure mounted, but the real reckoning was still ahead. The lawsuits were only the beginning. The true storm wasn't coming from the lawyers. It was about to hit GM from Washington. Congress turns up the heat. When Congress gets involved, GM's problems went from corporate to national. As the legal battles raged on, the media coverage intensified, and the public outcry grew louder. The crisis surrounding GM's engine failures finally caught the attention of lawmakers. Congress, once content to stay on the sidelines, now took a keen interest in GM's handling of the situation. With thousands of consumers left stranded by defective vehicles and countless reports of GM's inaction, lawmakers had no choice but to investigate further. Political pressure on GM surged as investigations into its response to the engine failures intensified. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration began scrutinizing GM's failure to issue a timely recall and notify the public. The company's handling of the crisis was now under intense federal scrutiny. GM faced the very real possibility of federal penalties and a significant loss of consumer trust. What GM hoped would be a temporary issue was becoming a matter of survival. Just when GM thought things couldn't get worse, the federal government was about to pile on even more. The rebellion. Drivers fight back. What began as isolated frustrations is now becoming a movement, and GM is powerless to stop it. As GM's customers continued to deal with engine failures, their anger turned into organized resistance. What had started as an outpouring of frustration on social media soon evolved into a full-scale rebellion. Forums, Facebook groups, and Reddit threads dedicated to GM's engine failures gained traction as more and more truck owners came forward with their stories. These drivers weren't just complaining, they were organizing. Many customers shared similar experiences. They bought GM trucks expecting reliability, only to face unexpected engine failures. Videos of blown engines and frustrated customers spread quickly, revealing a larger pattern GM tried to deny. Drivers began connecting, sharing stories, and filing class action lawsuits. The rebellion grew stronger, with GM unable to stop it. What was once a loyal customer base became an outspoken group fighting for their rights. GM had failed to act in time, and now its customers were taking matters into their own hands. The quiet base was organizing, and GM didn't know how to fight back. Fuel economy's hidden price. What GM didn't tell you about their oil fix? It's costing you at the pump. Big time. When GM introduced the oil weight fix as a solution to the engine failures, many truck owners were initially relieved. Finally, there was a potential way to avoid further engine damage. However, as time went on, the unintended consequences of this fix became clear. The oil change recommendation, which suggested switching from 0W20 to 0W40, didn't just mask the symptoms, it created a new set of problems. The thicker oil GM recommended temporarily addressed overheating issues, but drastically reduced fuel efficiency. Truck owners quickly noticed the drop in miles per gallon, which GM failed to disclose. The change came with a hidden cost. Owners now faced hundreds, if not thousands, of extra dollars spent on fuel. These drivers had purchased trucks expecting reasonable efficiency, but instead, they were burdened with a fix that only masked the engine's core problem. This solution wasn't just a temporary patch, it became a long-term financial drain. What GM hoped would be a cheap fix turned into an expensive, ongoing burden for its customers, increasing their frustration. The whistleblowers GM tried to silence. Behind the polished press releases and staged statements, a different story was unfolding inside GM's headquarters. Engineers who worked on the L87 engine saw the disaster coming years before it hit the headlines. Leaked memos and anonymous accounts described frantic warnings about rod-bearing wear, oil starvation, and crankshaft alignment failures that were brushed aside in the name of cost-cutting. One engineer described it bluntly. "We told them these engines wouldn't last." They didn't care others raised red flags in testing, only to see reports buried deep within internal systems, never reaching the public. Instead of addressing the flaws, leadership doubled down on marketing, pouring millions into ads celebrating unmatched durability, while knowing that durability was the very thing missing. Some insiders couldn't stay silent. A handful of whistleblowers reached out to lawyers and regulators, confirming what customers would later discover on the road. These weren't random mechanical glitches. They were predictable failures. GM had the knowledge, the data, and the warnings, but chose to bury them. The scandal wasn't just mechanical, it was moral. The very people who built the trucks were sounding alarms, but corporate leadership decided silence was more profitable. But the damage didn't stop at America's borders. What began as a domestic scandal was about to spill onto the global stage, and GM couldn't contain it. The global fallout, GM's reputation on the line. What started as an American scandal didn't stay in America. GM's L87 engine failure sent shockwaves into its global markets, where trust was already fragile. In Latin America, where GM sells Silverado and Sierra trucks as aspirational symbols of strength, sales began to stall as word spread. In the Middle East, where reliability in harsh conditions is everything, dealers faced uneasy buyers suddenly asking if GM's professional grade was nothing but a slogan. The damage spread even further. In China, one of GM's most important markets, consumer watchdogs began raising questions about whether the company could be trusted with future models. International press picked up the story, framing GM as a company willing to gamble with safety worldwide. What should have been a contained recall in North America turned into a global PR nightmare, with buyers around the world questioning whether GM's promise of durability was worth the risk. Competitors didn't miss their chance. Toyota leaned into its reputation for bulletproof engineering, Ram promoted its extended warranties abroad, and Ford highlighted its global dominance in truck reliability. GM wasn't just losing sales in the US, it was bleeding credibility in every market it touched. And once a reputation cracks overseas, rebuilding it isn't just difficult, it's nearly impossible. The L87 wasn't just a bad engine, it became a global liability, and the stain on GM's name crossed borders faster than any recall ever could. And while global markets recoiled, GM's American customers were learning an even harsher truth. The company's failures didn't just endanger engines, they came with a built-in time bomb set to explode the moment the warranty expired. Warranty trap, the time bomb. After the warranty expires. When your truck dies right after the warranty expires, GM's silence becomes a nightmare. GM's engine failures didn't just leave customers stranded, they often left them in financial peril, particularly when the failures occurred right after their warranties had expired. While GM had initially offered warranty coverage for the defects, many owners found that once the coverage ended, they were left with no recourse. Some trucks began to experience engine seizures at just over 6,000 miles, right after the warranty had lapsed, leaving owners facing repair bills of up to $1,500 for a new engine, not including labor costs. For many, these repairs were an insurmountable financial burden. The frustration was compounded by GM's refusal to assist once the warranty had expired. Drivers were left to fend for themselves, with no support from the very company that had sold them the defective trucks in the first place. Stories of angry customers begging for help from GM's customer service were all too common. Some managed to receive partial goodwill repairs, but the majority were forced to pay for the full cost of the repairs themselves. In cases where customers tried to make a case to GM, they were told that the company could not provide any further assistance due to the warranty expiration. For GM owners, the real damage wasn't just the breakdown. It was the warranty trap that left them paying for GM's failures. These truck owners were now paying for a defective vehicle that GM had known about, but failed to address in time. By now, you've seen the full story, but there's so much more to come. Don't miss out on future updates. Subscribe now and stay ahead of the curve. Hit the bell so you never miss another shocking reveal. The trust breakdown. GM's legacy in shambles. GM's reputation, built over decades, now lies in ruins, eroded by a single, preventable disaster. The engine failures, the delays in action, and the subsequent backlash have irreparably damaged GM's legacy. Once known for building dependable trucks that were synonymous with American strength and durability, the brand now faces the consequences of its own negligence. The damage is more than just financial, it is cultural. For years, GM built its reputation on the promise of reliability, a promise that was shattered with the engine failures that plagued its vehicles. This wasn't just a setback for GM, it was a collapse of the trust that had been painstakingly built over generations. The impact of this disaster extends far beyond GM itself. It has tarnished the entire pickup truck segment, as consumers now question whether they can trust any automaker's claims of reliability. Resale values for GM trucks have plummeted, with some models losing as much as 10 to 15% of their value in the used market. Insurance rates for vehicles with affected engines have also risen, as companies factor in the risk of breakdowns and costly repairs. What was once considered the heart of American automotive engineering now carries a stigma. In the end, the fallout from this disaster won't just be felt by GM, it will haunt the entire pickup industry for years to come. GM's inability to recover from this crisis has sent a clear message to consumers. Even the most established brands are not immune to failure, and once trust is broken, it's almost impossible to rebuild. If you've made it this far, you're ahead of the game. Don't let this story fade away. Share it with others who need to know the truth. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more updates on this evolving crisis. The more we spread the word, the harder it is for companies to hide the truth. Thanks for watching, and remember, your voice matters. Let's keep fighting for the answers we deserve.